The rain had been falling since morning, thin and cold and endless. The kind of rain that did not announce itself with thunder but simply settled over the city like a grey coat nobody had asked to wear. Julian Ashworth, Earl of Ravenscourt, stood at the tall window of his study and watched it fall on the black iron railings below, on the wet stone of the street, on the backs of servants hurrying past with baskets held over their heads. He was not thinking of the rain. He was thinking of the letter in his hand, the one his steward, Mr. Colborne, had sent from the country estate 3 days before. The tenants of Renmore Hall are content, my lord, the letter said. All accounts are settled and in good order. There is nothing that requires your lordship's attention at this time. Julian had read that same sentence or one very much like it, for 2 years running. And 2 years running. Something in his chest had told him it was a lie polished smooth enough to pass for truth. He set the letter down on the desk and pressed his fingers to his eyes. He was 28, and he had inherited the earldom at 23, when his father died of a fever that came on fast and took him faster. In 5 years he had learned a great many things about being an earl. He had learned how a room changed when he entered it, how conversation grew careful, how women who had never once looked at him twice suddenly found him fascinating the moment his title was spoken aloud. He had learned that the word content meant something different when it came from a steward's pen than when it came from the mouth of a man who was actually content. He had also learned, from a whispered conversation overheard at his club not a fortnight past, that Mr. Colborne had been seen at the gaming tables in London with more coin than any steward's salary ought to provide. Julian did not know if it was true. He only knew he could not learn the truth by writing letters that would be answered by the very man he suspected. He could not learn it by sending an investigator, either, for word would travel back down the roads faster than any man could ride, and whatever was hidden would be hidden better before he arrived. If he wanted the truth, he would have to go and find it himself. And he would have to go as no one at all. He rang for his valet, a steady, quiet man named Foss who had served the Ashworth family since Julian was a boy and who had never once, in all that time, asked a question he was not meant to ask. I will need clothes, Julian said when Foss appeared. Poor ones. A laborer's coat. Boots that have seen work. Nothing that marks me as anything but a man walking the roads for wages. Foss did not blink. How poor, my lord. Poor enough that no innkeeper looks at me twice, and no beggar looks at me with envy. I understand, my lord. Foss paused at the door. And how long will your lordship require to look poor? I do not know yet, Julian said. As long as it takes. By the second week, dressed in a rough brown coat gone thin at the elbows and boots a size too large stuffed with straw at the toes, Julian Ashworth had become, for all purposes, no one. He carried no signet ring. He carried no card case, no fine watch, only a few coins sewn into the lining of his coat where a thief's fingers would not think to look. He had cropped his own hair shorter and let it go unwashed for 3 days before he left, until it lay flat and dull instead of the careful gold his valet usually dressed it into. He told his household he was traveling north on estate business. He told no one where he was actually bound, which was south on foot, toward the market town nearest Renmore Hall, where he intended to walk among his own tenants as a stranger and hear, with his own ears, what they would never say to an earl's face. He had not accounted for the cold. It was late autumn and the roads were wet, and a laborer's coat that looked convincingly thin was also, he discovered within 2 days, actually thin. By the 3rd day his boots had let in water at every puddle, and his stomach had learned what it was to go a full day on a heel of bread bought with his own hidden coin, because a poor man did not eat at coaching inns, and Julian had wanted, foolishly perhaps, to live the disguise all the way down to his bones. He had not expected to nearly faint from it. On the 4th day he came into the market town of Ashwell as the light was failing, his legs unsteady beneath him, his breath coming shallow and quick, and the market square, full of stalls being packed away for the night, tilted once, sharply, before his eyes. He caught himself against a cart wheel. His hand, when he looked at it, was shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, though the cold was there too, deep and constant, in his chest and in his fingers and in the roots of his teeth. He sat down because his legs would no longer hold him up, on the low stone step outside a shuttered shop, and he put his head against the cold wall behind him, and for the first time since he had left Renmore House, Julian Ashworth was afraid. Not of discovery, not of scandal, but of the small, plain, animal fear of a body that had not been fed enough and had walked too far in wet boots. He did not know how long he sat there. He only knew that the market noises grew distant and strange, and the cold settled into him like something with weight, and then a voice, close by, cut through the fog. Sir? Sir? Can you hear me? He opened his eyes. A young woman was crouched in front of him, her skirts gathered in one hand to keep them from the wet ground, a basket over her other arm with 2 unsold loaves of bread still inside it, covered by a cloth. She had a plain brown wool dress and an apron dusted white with flour, and her face, close to his, was creased with a concern too immediate and too plain to be anything but real. I am well, Julian said, though his voice came out thin and did not convince even himself. You are not well, the young woman said. You are the color of the underside of a fish, and your lips have gone blue at the edges. How long have you been sitting here? I do not know. She looked at him for one more moment, assessing, the way a person assesses a wall that might be about to fall. And then, without another word of debate, she set down her basket, and she reached up, and she unwound the shawl from around her own shoulders. A plain gray wool thing, worn soft at the edges from years of use, and she wrapped it around him. No, Julian said, or tried to say. You will be cold yourself. I have walked less far today than you have, by the look of your boots, she said. And I have a fire waiting for me at home in 20 minutes. You do not look as though you have anywhere waiting for you at all. She tucked the shawl closer around his shoulders with brisk, practical hands, the way one might settle a blanket over a child, or a horse. There. Now, can you stand? Do you think if I help you? I do not wish to trouble you. You are not troubling me. You are sitting on a step nearly frozen, which is troubling me. So the least you can do is let me help you up. There was no scold in her voice, only a kind of brisk, unshaken practicality. As though this were a task no different from kneading dough or sweeping a step. She held out her hand. He took it. Her fingers were small and warm and rough at the tips in the particular way of a hand that had done real work, and she pulled him up with more strength than her size suggested she ought to have, and steadied him when he swayed. There is a bakery 2 streets from here, she said. My father's. We are closing for the night, but there is a fire, and there is bread that did not sell, and no one will miss it. Will you come? Julian looked at her. In the failing light he could see she was not, by the standards of the drawing rooms he had spent 5 years being chased through, a beauty. Her nose had a small crook to it, as if broken once and healed slightly crooked. Her hands were red at the knuckles from cold water and hard work. Her hair, a warm chestnut brown, had come loose from its pins in places and hung in soft, unruly pieces around her face. But her eyes, when they met his, were a clear hazel green, and they held no calculation in them at all, no measuring of his coat, no wondering what he might be worth, only the plain, unguarded concern of one person looking at another person who was cold and unwell. I have no coin to pay you, he said. It was, in that moment, entirely true. He had left his hidden coins that morning in payment for a night at a rough inn, and what remained would not stretch to charity offered back to him. I did not ask for coin, she said. I asked if you would come and sit by a fire and eat bread that would otherwise go stale by morning. That is not charity. That is simply not wasting a loaf. She picked her basket back up. Come. You are still shaking. He went with her. The bakery was small, a single low-ceilinged room behind the shop front, with a great brick oven still warm from the day's baking, and the smell, flour and yeast and wood smoke, settled so deep into the walls that Julian thought it must live in the very stone of the place. A gray cat with white paws lay curled near the hearth and opened one eye at their entrance before closing it again, entirely unbothered. Father, the young woman called. We have a guest for the fire. An older man appeared from a back room, wiping flour-dusted hands on his apron, and looked at Julian with the same open, unsuspicious concern his daughter had shown, without a single question about who Julian was or why he was there. Sit, sit, the man said, gesturing at a low bench by the hearth. You'll take some broth. Clara, is there broth left? There is, said Clara, and Julian turned the name over once in his mind, quietly, the way a man might turn over a coin to check its weight. Clara. And she was already moving toward the small black pot that hung over the coals, ladling a thin, warm, onion-scented broth into a wooden bowl, which she pressed into his cold hands with instructions that he was to drink it slowly, in small sips, because a man who had gone too long without food would make himself sick if he ate too fast. He drank it slowly. It was the best thing he had tasted in 5 years of state dinners and French cooks and silver dishes brought out on silver trays. He did not say so, because he could not think of a way to say it that would not sound like a lie from a man in a poor man's coat. You are not from Ashwell, Clara said, settling onto the bench across from him, her father having returned to the back room to bank the ovens for the night. It was not quite a question. No, Julian said. I am traveling, looking for work, mostly. I have walked further than I planned today. What work? Whatever is offered. I have done farm work. Some carpentry. This, too, was not entirely a lie. Julian's father had insisted, when Julian was a boy, that he learn the use of his hands as well as the use of his name, so that he would never look down on a man who worked for his bread. Julian had hated the lessons at the time. He was grateful for them now, sitting in a bakery with broth warming his hands, able to answer her questions without every word being false. There's work here if you want it, Clara said. Not much. We cannot pay a great deal. But my father's back troubles him in the mornings, and there is wood to split, and the delivery cart needs a driver 2 days a week since our old man Tolliver took ill. She studied him for a moment, the same frank, unhurried assessment she had given him on the step. You do not look like a man who has done much farm work, if I am honest. Your hands are too smooth beneath the dirt. Julian felt something in his chest go very still. He looked at his own hands. He had rubbed dirt into them that morning, deliberately to roughen their appearance, and found, with an uncomfortable jolt, that she had seen straight through the effort. "I have not always done farm work," he said carefully. "I fell on hard times more recently than my coat would suggest." "Ah," Clara said. It was a small sound, and Julian understood at once that it was a sound she used often. A sound that meant she had noted something and set it carefully aside to consider later, rather than push at it now. "Well, whatever brought you to that step tonight, you are welcome to the loft above the shop for as long as you need it, if you are willing to earn your keep splitting wood and driving the cart. It is not grand, but it is dry and it is warm enough with the ovens below." "I do not know your name," Julian said. "You know I need work." "I do not know what to call the woman offering it." "Clara Bennett," she said, and held out her hand again. This time not to pull him up but simply to shake his, in the plain, direct manner of a man closing a bargain rather than a lady in a drawing room. "And you?" He had thought about this moment on the road, in the way a man thinks about a fall before he takes it, bracing for impact that has not yet come. He had decided, days before, that if anyone asked, he would give the name of an old groom who had served his family for 30 years and had passed the winter before. A kind man, a good man, whose name Julian felt he could borrow without dishonoring it. "Jack Ridley," he said, and shook her hand. "Well then, Mr. Ridley," Clara said, and there was the faintest ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth, quickly suppressed, as though smiling too easily were a habit she had trained herself out of. "Welcome to the bakery. Mind the cat. She bites if you tread on her tail." He slept that night in the loft above the shop, on a straw mattress that smelled of dust and dried lavender. Wrapped in a blanket, Clara had brought up herself along with a second bowl of broth for later, in case the cold comes back in the night. He lay awake a long while, listening to the settling creaks of the old building and the faint, comforting smell of yesterday's bread rising up through the floorboards, and he thought, with a clarity that startled him, that he had not felt this warm, not merely in body, but in some quieter place beneath it, in a very long time. He had come to Ashwell to learn the truth about his own estate. He had not expected to be handed the truth about kindness, freely, by a woman who did not know his name. The next morning he woke before dawn to the sound of the ovens being lit below, and by the time the sun was properly up he had split more wood than the small yard's rack could easily hold, working with an unfamiliar axe that blistered his soft palms within the hour. He did not complain. He found, oddly, that he did not want to. There was something clean about the ache in his shoulders that no amount of fencing practice at his club had ever given him. The particular, honest tiredness of work that produced something a person could see and use and be glad of. Clara found him at midday, sweat cooling on his brow despite the autumn chill, and looked at the neat, high stack of split logs with an expression he was coming to recognize. The small flicker of surprise, quickly put away, that meant she had expected one thing and found another. "You work harder than a man looking merely to earn his supper," she said. "I do not know how to do anything by halves," Julian admitted, which was, again, entirely true, though she could not know how many meanings the sentence carried. She brought him bread and cheese and they ate sitting on the low wall at the edge of the yard, and she talked, in her plain, unhurried way, about the bakery. How her mother had died when Clara was 16, how she had run the ovens and the accounts and the deliveries herself these 7 years since, how her father's back had grown worse each winter until the heavy lifting fell to her almost entirely, how there was a debt on the shop, taken out 3 winters past when the harvest failed and flour prices rose beyond what the bakery could bear, and how the debt was owed to a man named Mr. Vane, a moneylender and property broker who held paper on half the struggling shops in Ashwell, and who had begun, in recent months, to call more often than the debt strictly required. "He says he only wishes to see how we go on," Clara said, and there was something careful in the way she said it, something that told Julian she did not believe this any more than he did. "But he looks at the shop the way a man looks at a thing he has already decided is his. Does your father know how bad the debt has become? My father does not like to think of it. I manage the accounts. I have been managing them for 3 years, telling him it will be well, telling myself the same." She looked out at the yard, at the neat stack of wood, at the gray sky beginning to spit thin rain again. "I am 23, Mr. Ridley. I have run this bakery alone in every way that matters since I was 16, and I have never once told my father the truth of how close we sit to losing it, because he could not bear it, and because I did not know what good the truth would do beyond breaking his heart before it needed breaking." Julian was quiet for a long moment. He thought of his own steward's letters. The tenants of Renmore Hall are content, and the careful lies men told to spare each other, or to spare themselves, and how those lies, however kindly meant, always left someone standing alone at the center of them, carrying weight no one else could see. "You are not alone in it," he said, before he could stop himself. "Whatever it comes to, you are not alone in." Clara looked at him with an expression he could not quite read, surprise, and something gentler beneath the surprise, and then she looked away, out at the rain beginning properly now, and said only, "You are a strange sort of laborer, Mr. Ridley," and went back inside to see to the ovens, leaving him sitting on the wall with the distinct, uncomfortable sense that he had said more than a hired hand ought to say, and meant every word of it besides. Over the days that followed, a rhythm settled between them that Julian would later think of, when he allowed himself to think of it at all, as the truest days of his life. He drove the delivery cart through the lanes of Ashwell and the outlying farms, and in the doing of it he heard, at last, the things his tenants would never have said to the Earl of Ravenscourt's face. He heard an old farm wife complain, without knowing who drove the cart she spoke to, that the new steward's man had raised her rent twice in a year for repairs that were never made. He heard a miller mutter that Mr. Colborne collected the harvest tithe in person now, rather than sending it up to the estate accounts as the old steward had, and no one quite knew where the difference went. He heard, piece by piece, in careless words dropped by people who did not know they spoke to their own landlord, the shape of a theft that had been going on, patiently and quietly, for 2 years, rents inflated, repairs invoiced but not made, tithes skimmed before they ever reached the estate ledger, and all of it signed off each quarter with the same 3 words, all is content. He said nothing of what he learned to Clara. He was not yet ready to explain how a common laborer came to understand estate ledgers so well, or why the mention of Renmore Hall made his jaw go tight. But he found himself, each evening, drawn back to the small warm room behind the bakery, to the smell of bread and the sight of Clara's hands. Reddened, capable, careful, moving through dough or ledgers or mending with the same unhurried competence. And he found that the questions he wanted to ask her were no longer about her father's debt or the moneylender's visits, but about herself, what she had wanted, before the bakery claimed all her hours, whether she had ever wished to leave Ashwell, what made her laugh, since he had heard the sound only once, quick and surprised, when the cat had chased its own tail across the kitchen floor and nearly upset a tray of unbaked loaves. He asked her, one evening, sitting by the banked fire while her father slept above, why she never spoke of marrying. Clara did not answer at once. She turned a wooden spoon over in her hands, and the firelight caught the small crook of her nose, the loose pieces of hair at her temple, and Julian thought, not for the first time, that he had stopped noticing these things as flaws within the first 3 days of knowing her, and had begun, somewhere in the days since, to think of them instead as simply hers, as much a part of what he had come to want as anything he had once been told to look for in a wife. Who would have me? Clara said finally, without bitterness, in the same plain tone she used to discuss flower prices. I have flour under my nails instead of lace at my wrists. I have no dowry beyond a shop that owes more than it is worth. Any man who wanted a wife would want one who could bring something to a marriage besides debt and blistered hands. She glanced at him, and there was the ghost of that suppressed smile again. I do not say this to be pitied, Mr. Ridley. I say it because it is true, and I have found it easier to know a true thing than to hope for a false one. I do not think, Julian said slowly, that a man who truly saw you would think for one moment that your hands were a flaw to overlook rather than a reason to want you. Clara went very still. The firelight moved between them, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, and Julian felt the same quiet, dangerous pull he had felt every evening for a week now, the wish to reach across the small space between them and take her roughened hand in his and tell her, plainly, everything. His name, his title, the disguise, the reason he had come, and the reason, entirely separate from any of it, that he no longer wished to leave. He did not do it. Not yet. The words sat behind his teeth, and he swallowed them down, and told himself, as he had told himself every night that week, that there would be a better moment to speak the truth than this one. He did not yet know that the truth was about to be forced into the open, not by his own choosing, but by the man whose name Clara had spoken with such careful unease. Mr. Vane, the moneylender, who came to call at the bakery 2 mornings later with a face like a closing door, and a piece of paper in his hand that would change everything. Mr. Vane arrived at the bakery a little after 9 in the morning, in a fine dark coat entirely unsuited to the mud of Ashwell's back lane, and he did not knock so much as announce himself, pushing the door open with the easy confidence of a man who believed the room already belonged to him in every way that mattered. Julian was in the yard splitting the last of the morning's wood when he heard the voice through the open window. Low, smooth, the kind of voice trained to sound reasonable while saying something that was not reasonable at all. Miss Bennett, I had hoped to find your father at home. He is resting, Mr. Vane. His back troubles him. I manage the accounts, as you well know, so whatever business you have may be brought to me directly. Very well. A pause, the small rustle of paper. The debt on the shop has come due in full, Miss Bennett. I had extended the term twice already, out of consideration for your family's difficulties. But my own patience and my own creditors have limits. I require payment of the full sum within the fortnight, or the shop and the land beneath it pass to me, as the paper your father signed makes plain. Julian set down the axe. The full sum, Clara repeated, and Julian heard, even through the window, the careful flatness she had put into her voice to keep it from shaking. You said, not 2 months past, that the quarterly payments would satisfy the debt through the winter. Circumstances change, Miss Bennett. Mr. Vane's voice did not change at all. That was the worst of it, Julian thought, moving quietly toward the window now, the coldness of a man discussing a debt as though it were weather. Though I will say, there is another path open to you, if the fortnight proves too short. I have long thought you a capable young woman, Miss Bennett, wasted on flour and ovens. A wife of mine would want for nothing, and the debt would trouble your father no further. The silence that followed lasted only a moment, but Julian felt it stretch like a wire pulled taut. I would rather lose the shop, Mr. Vane, Clara said very quietly, than gain you. There was a short, unpleasant laugh. You may feel differently in a fortnight, Miss Bennett, when your father is turned out of the only home he has left. Good day. The door opened and shut. Julian stood very still at the window, his hands, he realized, curled into fists at his sides, and something hot and unfamiliar moved through his chest. Not the cold, careful anger he had felt at his club hearing whispers of Colborne's theft, but something far more immediate, far more personal, as though Mr. Vane had reached into the room and put his hand on something that belonged, now, unmistakably, to Julian. He went inside. Clara was standing at the counter, both hands flat against the wood, her head bowed, her shoulders drawn up tight around her ears in the particular way of a person holding herself together by force of will alone. Clara. She looked up. Whatever she saw in his face made her straighten at once, wiping quickly at her eyes with the back of one flour-dusted hand, as though she had not meant to let anyone see. It is nothing, Mr. Ridley. A business matter. It does not concern you. I heard, Julian said quietly, through the window. I did not mean to listen, but I could not help it, and I am glad I did not, because I would not have known otherwise, and I would like to help. There is no help for it, Clara said, and there was a raw edge in her voice now, the careful flatness cracking at last. A fortnight, Mr. Ridley. I have gone over the accounts 100 times. There is no way to raise that sum in a fortnight, not by selling every loaf of bread we could bake between now and then, not if I sold the very ovens themselves. She laughed. A small broken sound with no humor in it at all. And even if I could, even if some miracle handed me the coin, he would find some other paper, some other clause, because it was never truly about the debt at all, was it? It was about this. She gestured at the small, warm, flower-scented room around them. About my father having nowhere else to go, and about me having no choice but to say yes to a man I would rather starve than marry. Julian crossed the room and, before he could think better of it, took both her hands in his. They were cold and shaking slightly, and he held them still between his own. I will not let that happen, he said. You are a laborer with a blistered axe hand. Mr. Ridley, Clara said, though she did not pull away. There is nothing you can do against a man like Vane. Julian looked at her for a long moment. The fire cracked softly in the hearth. The cat, curled by the warmth, opened one eye and closed it again, entirely unbothered by the weight of the silence in the room. There is more I can do than you know, he said. But I cannot do it as Jack Ridley. I will need to be someone else for a day or two. I will need you to trust me without understanding why, for just a little while longer. Can you do that? Something flickered across Clara's face. Confusion, and beneath it, a wary hope she seemed almost afraid to let show. You have asked me to trust a stranger before, in smaller ways, every day for 2 weeks, she said slowly. I do not know why I should stop now. Then don't stop, Julian said. Just a little while longer. I promise you, Clara. I will not let Vane take this shop, and I will not let him have you, whatever it costs. He left before dawn the next morning, taking the mail coach north with the last of his hidden coin, and by the following evening he was standing once more in his own study at Renmore House, in his own fine coat, with his own signet ring back upon his finger, feeling, for the first time in 2 weeks, like a stranger in his own skin. Foss took one look at him, thinner, sun-browned, his hands blistered and roughened in a way 5 years of gentleman's leisure had never made them, and said only, "Welcome home, my lord," with the careful blankness of a man who had many questions and intended to ask none of them. I need papers drawn tonight, Julian said. A debt purchased and cancelled. A Mr. Vane of Ashwell holds paper against a bakery belonging to a Mr. Bennett. I want the debt bought outright, at whatever price satisfies him, and the paper burned, not merely marked paid. And I want a second matter looked into by morning. A Mr. Colborne, my steward, and every ledger he has touched in 2 years. Send for Mr. Price, the solicitor, tonight if he will come. Foss did not blink. At once, my lord. It took 3 days to settle both matters. 3 days in which Julian did not sleep more than a handful of hours at a stretch. 3 days in which he sat across a table from his own solicitor and his own bank and separately from a very frightened Mr. Colborne, whose ledgers, once properly examined by men who could not be charmed or threatened, told a story of 2 years' quiet theft, rents inflated and pocketed, repairs invoiced and never made, tithes skimmed before they reached the estate, counts at all. Colborne did not deny it once the figures were laid before him. He wept and begged and offered to repay what he could, and Julian, who felt no particular mercy toward the man who had let his tenants suffer through 2 hard winters so that his own pockets might stay full, dismissed him without a character and set Mr. Price to recovering what funds could be recovered. The debt on the bakery was purchased and burned within the same 3 days, at a price Mr. Vane, faced with an offer from a solicitor representing an unnamed but clearly wealthy client, did not think twice about accepting. A price that included, at Julian's insistence, a signed statement from Vane that he would make no further calls upon the Bennett family, on any matter, ever again. On the 4th day, Julian rode back to Ashwell, not in a laborer's coat this time, but in his own dark blue riding coat on his own grey horse, the one every soul in the county who had ever laid eyes on the Earl of Ravenscourt would know at a glance. He did not go straight to the bakery. He went first to the small inn at the edge of town, where he sat for an hour turning over in his mind every way he might say what needed saying, and found that none of them felt like enough. In the end, he simply walked to the bakery as the afternoon light was turning gold, and found Clara in the yard, hanging washed linens on a line strung between two posts, and she turned at the sound of his footsteps and went very still. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Julian watched her eyes move over him, the fine coat, the polished boots, the signet ring catching the last of the light, and he watched, with an ache he had not expected, the exact moment understanding crossed her face. "Jack," she said very quietly. It was not quite a question. "My name is Julian Ashworth," he said. "I am the Earl of Ravenscourt. Ashwell sits within my own lands, Clara. I came here in disguise because I did not trust what my steward told me of my own tenants, and what I found instead, on the very first evening, was a woman who gave a shivering stranger her shawl and asked for nothing in return." Clara did not move. Her hands, still holding a length of wet linen, had gone quite still at her sides. "You let me speak to you every day for 2 weeks," she said slowly, "about debt and fear, and things I have never told another living soul, and the whole time you were—" She stopped. Something hardened in her face. Something he had not seen there before, not even in the worst of her fear over Vane. "You let me offer you the loft above my father's shop as though it were charity you needed, Clara. You let Mr. Vane's man tell my father the debt was cleared by an unnamed benefactor, and I let myself hope it was some distant relation, some mercy from the church poor fund, and it was you all along, and you said nothing." Her voice was rising now, not into a shout, but into something tight and wounded that was, Julian thought, far worse than any shout could have been. "You let me tell you I would rather starve than marry a man who saw me only as a solution to his own convenience. And you stood there in Jack Ridley's coat and said nothing, when you yourself had been." She stopped again and pressed the back of her wrist hard against her mouth, and Julian saw, with a lurch of his heart, that her eyes had filled with tears she was fighting not to let fall. "I did not tell you," Julian said quietly, "because I was afraid that the moment you knew, everything true between us would be buried under the title. I have spent 5 years being chased through drawing rooms by women who wanted the Earl of Ravenscourt and never once troubled themselves to want the man beneath the coat. I did not want that from you. I wanted—" He stopped and made himself go on, because he had promised himself, riding down from Ravenscourt House, that he would not leave a single true thing unsaid this time. "I wanted to know if a woman could care for Jack Ridley, blistered hands and empty pockets and all, because if she could, then whatever she felt for the man beneath would be real in a way nothing in my life has ever been real before." "You had no right," Clara said, though her voice had lost some of its heat, "to decide that test on my behalf without my consent." "You are right," Julian said. "I had no right. I am sorry, Clara. I am sorrier for that than for anything else I have done in my life." He took a step closer, slow, giving her every chance to step back if she wished it. She did not step back. "I did not clear the debt to buy you, or to buy your father's gratitude, or to make you feel you owed me anything at all. I cleared it because no woman who has been as generous as you were to a stranger on a cold step should ever have to marry a man like Vane to keep a roof over her father's head. That debt is gone, Clara, whether you ever speak to me again or not. It was never a price. It was only what was right." Clara looked at him for a long moment, the linen still damp and forgotten in her hands, the late light turning everything gold around them, the washing line, the small stone yard, the crooked line of her nose that Julian had stopped, weeks ago now, seeing as anything but exactly right. "I do not know," she said finally, "whether I am angry with Jack Ridley, or with the Earl of Ravenscourt, or simply with myself, for not seeing sooner that they were the same man all along." "They are the same man," Julian said. "Every part of him. The part that split your wood and drove your cart and drank your broth by the fire is the same part that rode 3 days to burn a piece of paper that was ruining your life. I did not become someone else when I put the fine coat back on, Clara. I only stopped hiding." She was quiet for a long moment. Somewhere beyond the yard, a dog barked twice and fell silent. The washing stirred faintly in the evening breeze. "I need time," Clara said at last, and her voice had gone soft again, uncertain in a way he had not heard from her before. "You have given me a great deal to sit with, my lord, and I find I cannot sit with it standing in a yard with wet linen in my hands." "Take whatever time you need," Julian said. "I will not press you. I will not call again until you send word that you wish me to. I only ask, when you have sat with it whatever you decide, that you remember it was Jack Ridley who fell in love with you first, before the Earl ever had the chance to." He bowed and turned, and walked away down the lane, and did not look back, though every step cost him more than the whole 2 weeks of walking on blistered feet had cost him combined. He did not hear from her for 11 days. He stayed at Ravenscourt Hall through all of them, throwing himself into the work of righting what Colborne had wronged, repaying tenants who had been overcharged, repairing the cottages that had been neglected, sitting for the first time in years at the same table as the men and women whose rents paid for his fine coats, listening properly, without disguise now, because they had all heard by then what the Earl had done about Colborne, and they no longer needed to be tricked into speaking truth. To him, on the 12th day, a letter came, In a plain hand he did not recognize at first, until he saw the small, careful loop of the C. My lord, my father says the ovens have never drawn so well since the chimney was cleaned last spring, and asks when you might call again to see whether the delivery cart still remembers your driving. I have sat with it as you asked me to. I find I am not angry any longer, or not very much, and not for very long at a time. I find mostly that I miss Jack Ridley's blistered hands helping me stack wood, and I have come to understand slowly that I do not have to miss him because you tell me he is not gone, only dressed differently. Come to the orchard behind the shop on Sunday, if you are willing. There is an apple tree there my mother planted the year I was born. I should like to sit beneath it with you, with all of you this time, the Earl and the laborer both, and see what grows from that, if anything is willing to grow at all. Clara. Julian read the letter 3 times before he set it down, and then he rang for Foss, and asked him to have the gray horse saddled at first light. He found her beneath the apple tree exactly as she had promised, the last of the season's fruit hanging heavy and red above her. Her hair loose for once instead of pinned, catching the morning light in threads of warm chestnut brown. She stood when she saw him coming and did not curtsy, and Julian was glad of it, because a curtsy from Clara Bennett would have felt, in that moment, like a wall going up between them rather than a greeting. You came, she said. I would have walked here on blistered feet again if you had asked it of me, Julian said, and was rewarded with the small, slow smile she gave so rarely, the one that started at the corner of her mouth and took its time reaching her eyes. I do not think that will be necessary, my lord. Julian, he said, if you are willing. I have been an earl to a great many people who never once used my given name with any warmth in it. I would like very much to hear it from you instead. Julian, Clara said, testing the shape of it, and something in Julian's chest loosened entirely at the sound of it in her voice. I have thought a great deal these past days about what I want, and what I am willing to become, if I say yes to whatever it is you mean to ask me beneath this tree. I have not asked anything yet. You are about to. I can see it on your face. You wore the same look the night you told me you would not let Vane take the shop, right before you disappeared for 3 days and came back an earl. She folded her arms, though there was no real defensiveness in it. Only the old, familiar bracing of a woman used to meeting difficult things head-on rather than flinching from them. So before you ask it, I will tell you what I am willing to become. I am willing to be a countess who still knows how to bake her own bread. I am willing to sit at your grand table and also split my own firewood if the mood takes me, and I will not be made ashamed of flour under my nails by any duchess or dowager in your acquaintance. If you want a wife who will fold herself into whatever shape the title requires, Julian Ashworth, I am the wrong woman entirely. I have spent 5 years searching for a woman who would fold herself into that shape, Julian said, and finding every single time that the folding left nothing real behind. To love. I do not want that woman, Clara. I have never wanted her. I want the one who corrected my grip on an axe handle and told me, without an ounce of pity in her voice, that any man who overlooked her flour-dusted hands did not deserve to look at her at all. He crossed the last of the distance between them and took both her hands in his, the way he had the day Vane's threat had hung over them both. Marry me. Not the Earl marrying a convenient bride, and not Jack Ridley marrying above the station he pretended to. Just marry me. All of me, every coat I have ever worn. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never once regret giving your shawl to a shivering stranger on a cold step. Clara looked up at him and her eyes were bright, and this time she did not fight the tears at all, but let them fall unashamed, the way she let everything true about herself show plainly to the world. Yes, she said, I will. He kissed her then, beneath her mother's apple tree, with the last of the season's fruit hanging red above them both, and somewhere beyond the orchard wall a thrush began to sing, unhurried, into the warm autumn morning. They were married before the first snow fell, in the small stone church at Ashwell rather than the grand chapel at Renmore Hall, because Clara had asked for it, and Julian had found he could deny her nothing that mattered so much to her heart. Her father stood proud and disbelieving through the whole ceremony, and the boy who had once helped Julian learn to properly harness the delivery cart cried loudly enough during the vows that half the church laughed instead of weeping themselves. A year later, the bakery in Ashwell still stood, run now by a hired baker under Clara's careful watch, for she visited twice a week without fail and could still be found on quiet mornings, with her sleeves rolled and her hands deep in dough, teaching the new baker's daughter the particular trick of a well-risen loaf. At Renmore Hall, in the long gallery where portraits of 5 generations of solemn, carefully painted earls looked down from the walls, a new portrait had been added, the young Countess of Renmore, painted not in silk and pearls as tradition demanded, but in a plain grey dress with a basket of apples over one arm, a small crooked smile caught forever at the corner of her mouth, because she had insisted, and the Earl, who by then had learned there was no arguing with her once her mind was set, had simply asked the painter to paint her exactly as she was. In the drawing room below on cold evenings, a grey wool shawl, worn soft at the edges, mended twice now, and never once replaced with anything finer, still hung on a hook by the door, within easy reach of the fire. Julian never let it be put away. He liked, on the coldest nights, to watch his wife wrap it around her own shoulders without a second thought, exactly as she had wrapped it around a shivering stranger on a market step, in a life that felt, now, like it belonged to someone else entirely, and yet had brought him, in the end, to exactly where he was always meant to be. The end. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.